There are 7.5 billion people in this world, driving over 1.5 billion vehicles. 363 million of those vehicles are commercial. These vehicles are transporting people, goods, and services that all do their part to keep the world in motion. From the most populous of places on Earth to the most remote places only accessible during the right conditions. It is not often that we realize how much everyone and everything is constantly in motion until it stops. When it stops, that is where we come in. To grab, pull, push, winch, hoist, jump, unstick, unlock, or just plain maneuver you out of the mess you found yourself in. Some would call us drivers, operators, first responders, or essential workers. But I like to think of us as heroes from the ditch.
Casey, go get the coil chain. Those were the words of my father before he and I would leave the shop in the wrecker to recover a giant chunk of cold-rolled steel. Growing up and operating in an area where steel foundries dot the Kentucky side of the Ohio River, I've seen my share of steel coils in the ditch, bearing down on broken trailers and telescoped like the spyglass of a mariner. Lifting the steel coils was accomplished with the coil chain, because that's how it was always done. The coil chain was the biggest, heaviest piece of recovery gear in our inventory. It made sense to use that chain because steel coils were the biggest, heaviest loads that we recovered and lifted at the time. No more thought or reasoning was given other than it was just the way it was. We always did what we'd always done. Well, that practice came to an end the day the coil chain died, reaffirming the old saying, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. I once had the chance to see an operator rig a tattered and frayed 2-ply recovery strap to an overturned trailer. From a distance, it looked like a recovery strap, but upon closer inspection, it became clear that my daughter's threadbare and holey jeans have more strength than that strap. The operator chose the strap because it's the trailer uprighting strap. A classic song from ZZ Top, Blue Jean Blues, includes a line about a pair of blue jeans that says, "I could tell that they was mine by the oil and gasoline." Well, the owner of the strap should have had no difficulty in distinguishing his strap from one that would pass an inspection. Unlike your favorite pair of jeans, there's nothing fashionable about a cut, frayed, and worn-out recovery strap. Well, these anecdotes illustrate a common problem in the towing industry, which is a lack of understanding about certain truths involving rigging. We are a creative bunch when it comes to solving problems with the tools that we have, but sometimes the creative genius that solves one problem creates another that might not be so apparent on the surface. I've been guilty of using a straight blade screwdriver as a pry bar. Well, who hasn't? The tool clearly states on the handle, not to be used as a prying device, but it's just so convenient when it's laying there and the proper tool is all the way across the shop in my toolbox. There's no such warning written on our rigging, no prohibitions for using chain where a synthetic sling is preferred, or no disclaimer about cutting a web sling when it stretches over the head of a bolt. So it's understandable that we need to educate ourselves more about the selection of rigging and proper tactics for its use. Before going any further, I need to define a couple of things. First is the term ultimate load. Manufacturers of quality rigging will test their products to failure to achieve consistency within their design and manufacturing processes. The test involves applying force to the rigging component until it deforms or no longer supports the load. The ultimate load test applies force to the rigging component in a straight line with a consistent and gradually increasing force until failure is achieved. Once a product is ready for production, its ultimate load values are published and available to the consumer. A working load limit is designed to a piece of rigging based upon a design factor. Design factors are expressed as ratios like 3-to-1, 4-to-1, 5-to-1, etc. The working load limit, generally expressed in pounds, kilograms, tons, or metric tons, is a percentage of the component's ultimate load value and provides a theoretical reserve in capacity. Applying force at or below the component's working load limit and in the manner in which the article was designed to support the load will permit a long and happy life of your rigging hardware. Abusing the rigging and applying force greater than the working load limit will lead to premature failure, injury, or even death. Working load limits are similar to speed limits insofar as most drivers are willing to risk the consequences of breaking them. But when the stakes are raised on lifting, winching, or towing operations, I'd hope you'd set the cruise control to the right speed to avoid a tragic end. When selecting and installing rigging for a particular task, I would encourage every operator to consider the manner in which it was designed to be used and tested to perform its ultimate load capacity. We are going to discuss 3 types of rigging common to the industry and highlight their design concepts and testing conditions. This should give you a better understanding of strengths and weaknesses of rigging. We'll begin with chain. An alloy chain begins its life as a coil of steel rod, hundreds of feet long. The rod is made from steel alloy that meets exact properties of metallurgical composition. The rod is clean and drawn into an exact wire diameter. The grade and trace code are stamped on it, then it is cut to the length required for a chain link. This piece is bent in a mandrel and formed into a link which interconnects with the previously formed link, creating a chain from the wire-formed links. The chain then passes to the welder, where each link is machine welded electrically with no filler by heating the edges of the wire ends and forging them together. After the chain is formed and welded, its size is adjusted to ensure the consistency of the length of each link. Concurrently, the sizing process also tests the strength of the chain. Samples of the welded chain are routinely cut from the production run and are tested to verify the integrity of the weld and to check physical properties. The manufacturer collects data from each test and stores them electronically for future reference. Alloy chain is quenched and tempered in an induction heat treater. The chain is heated to between 1600 and 1700 degrees Fahrenheit, quenched in water, and then tempered at 400 to 600 degrees. Before the chain is packaged for sale, it has been proof tested to twice its working load limit. For application to this conversation, the most important thing to consider is the method in which the proof test and ultimate load tests are conducted. Each end of a section of chain is coupled to a device which exactly replicates a chain link. Each link is aligned and it is pulled in a straight line. There are no twists or turns. The length of the chain doesn't pass over any object, and the force is applied evenly and consistently. At the conclusion of the ultimate load test, the force required to break the chain is recorded. Chain of good quality will have consistent ultimate load values, thereby enabling the manufacturer to publish ultimate load values, which by definition is the force at which the chain deforms or no longer supports the load. When stressing the chain to failure, it is in its optimal configuration. Brand new, unused, half-inch grade 100 chain breaks consistently at 60,000 pounds. How much force does it take to break the same chain 10 years later after riding in the bottom of your toolbox? How much force does it take to break the chain when it's rigged around the sharp edge of a truck frame? How much force does it take to break the chain when it's rigged to a winch line hook, and only 3 lengths of the chain are in contact with the hook as it makes its way through the throat? Well, these questions aren't meant to make it acceptable to pull any piece of rigging to its breaking strength, nor can an accurate number be calculated for every configuration that doesn't mirror the testing environment. But we must acknowledge that the condition and the manner in which the chain is used can lessen its strength. 2 recommendations for increasing the vitality of chain in the towing and recovery industry are: avoid sharp edges and avoid rigging the chain around an object whose diameter is too small. Automobiles and commercial vehicles lack engineered connections for towing and recovery rigging that can withstand forces more than 25% of the casualty's static weight. So, when the recovery environment gets extreme and the forces required to recover the casualty go up, the operator must get creative in the manner that he secures the chain. A common location for securing a chain sling is the frame rail of a full-framed vehicle. Since frame rails are formed in a C shape, they have a top and bottom flange that have sharp inside edges. When a chain sling is routed around them, individual links are exposed to these sharp edges. A remedy to this situation in some cases is to rig the chain to the opposite frame rail. When doing so, the chain lays over the smooth radius on the outside of the rail and greatly improves the angle at which the chain contacts the sharp edge of the web. There are also times when a wood block can be placed inside a frame rail, which prevents the chain links from contacting the sharp edge of the web. Whenever a hard and sharp edge contacts chain, the informed operator will make every effort to dampen the edge with some form of edge protection. Fire hose, conveyor belting, high-density rubber sheets are all items that can be easy to acquire, and they make great edge protection. Different thicknesses of lumber in short dimensions are also helpful tools to protect chain. Applying tension to a chain, which passes over a sharp edge, can easily bend links. ASME B30.9 requires a chain be removed from service if it has stretched, bent, twisted, or distorted chain links or components. While this standard isn't a law, it is the standard by which you'll be judged if a rigging failure leads to injury or death. When any piece of rigging passes over or around a fixed object, the relationship between the chain link diameter and the object's diameter is referred to as the D/D ratio. To maintain 100% of any size chain strength, the minimum diameter the object it's rigged around must be 6 times the chain diameter, or greater. Think about the last time you rigged a chain through a shackle and closed the sling, forming a basket hitch. You may have thought you had 2 times the strength in this configuration. However, the diameter of the shackle factors greatly into the sling's capacity. Half-inch chain is the most common size in the heavy-duty world, and its dimension makes it easy to calculate D/D. So let's consider a combination of half-inch chain and a 12.5-ton alloy shackle used to form what resembles a basket hitch. The shackle has a pin diameter of roughly 1 1/8 inches. When you divide the pin diameter by the chain link diameter, a D/D value of 1.77 is produced. Less than 60% of the chain's basket hitch capacity is available with a ratio this small. This method of rigging point loads the 2 or 3 links in contact with the shackle pin and dramatically reduces the strength of the chain. Reclaiming the strength can be accomplished by changing the end fittings on the chain and create what WreckMasters refer to as a Terry chain. Named after the legendary Terry Hummel sign, the Terry chain has a master ring at one end and a positive locking hook on the other. When forming a basket hitch, the hook is connected back into the master ring, avoiding the sharp bend around a small shackle pin when closing the system. It's important to note that the master ring must have the capacity of a two-leg chain bridle of the same diameter to obtain a basket hitch rating. Assembling chain slings and rigging chain should be done with the intention of maintaining as much of their strength as possible. Being creative and intentional about avoiding sharp edges and small diameters should be the aim of an informed operator. Shackles are a staple in the rigging cupboard in almost every wrecker. Whether they're screw pin, bolt type, wide body, or twist lock, a shackle is designed and engineered to have the force placed upon its major axis. The major axis of a shackle is the distance between the middle of the pin and the middle of the bow. A quality shackle will have its working load limit permanently labeled. It's applied as part of the forging process for the component. A shackle is rated to support its working load limit when the force is applied in line with respect to the center line of the product. Pulling sideways or at an angle to the center line isn't prohibited, but the operator should be aware of the fact that a reduction of strength should be observed. Conditions that can lead to side or angular loading are common in daily use. For example, think about how a shackle rests when rigged to a tailboard-mounted anchor point on your wrecker. Many times they cannot be loaded properly because of the geometry of the anchor. They become partially side-loaded. Think about when a shackle is connected to a lifting eye in a load that you're lifting. The lifting eye is stationary, and the force is being applied at an angle to the shackle. Angular or side loading will result in a reduction in the shackle's strength. A shackle that has been loaded 90 degrees to its major axis, or completely side-loaded, has 50% of its original strength. Therefore, a 7-ton shackle, when loaded 90 degrees to its major axis, becomes a 7,000-pound shackle. Deeper discussions about shackle strength and angles are available at WreckMaster courses. If you're interested in enhancing your knowledge and skills, I highly recommend registering for an in-person course today at WreckMaster.com. Well, nothing frustrates me more than being told to do or not to do something without being able to find out why I am or am not doing it. Many of you are in the habit of backing off the pin of a shackle a quarter turn when installing it. ASME B30.26 has the following statement regarding screw pin shackles. The screw pin threads shall be fully engaged and tight, and the shoulder should be in contact with the shackle body. Thus, contrary to popular belief, you should never back off the screw pin before use. The shackle pin should be a minimum of hand tight before the lift begins. I recently watched several videos on brake test procedures for shackles. I observed shackles fail at the threaded part of the pin several times. Leaving the pin loose permits a small gap between the external threads of the pin and the internal threads of the bow. When this condition is present, the shackle will not yield 100% of its rated capacity. Furthermore, a loose pin can back itself off further when slack conditions are present and the rigging is moved around. When disassembling rigging, if you encounter a shackle pin that can't be unscrewed by hand, insert a pointed pry bar in the hole that is forged in the end of the shackle pin to help unscrew it. Just be careful not to use a straight blade screwdriver, because this may be considered a prying operation. Well, the final component for today's conversation is by far the most common in our industry. An operator can master the disciplines of proper rigging, have the most diverse selection of hooks and shackles and slings. But if the connection between the winch and the rigging isn't sufficient, all of that is for naught. Wire rope loaded on a winch is probably the most abused and least maintained tool in the operator's toolbox. Like any other piece of rigging, a wire rope winch line has a working load limit. It is authorized to support a percentage of its ultimate load capacity, which is calculated when it is brand new and unused. Remember earlier when I stated that testing procedures to arrive at a working load limit are done without bending, twisting, or pulling the rigging at an angle. The same is true with wire rope. What happens the first time we engage the winch to gather wire rope onto the drum? The answer? The wire rope bends. It must, in order to complete a circle around the winch drum. The same thing happens when a snatch block is rigged on the line and we gain a mechanical advantage, or we redirect the pull. So, it's safe to say the wire rope isn't new anymore once it's been loaded onto a winch drum. An operator should be highly aware of the forces being placed on the wire rope when engaging the winch. If it takes 1,000 pounds to move the casualty, and a single winch line is secured to it, the wire rope is being subjected to no less than 1,000 pounds of force. I began my towing and recovery career trying to mimic the actions of my father and grandfather. I thought all I had to do was to rig the job the way they did, and I'd be successful. I was more focused on hooking the chains in the right place and using a snatch block or two to get the job done than I was being concerned about the force on the cable. Never did I know that I could actually use a little simple math to determine how much force my winch line would feel. In 2007, I set through my first WreckMaster class under the direction of David Bouvier. I have to admit, I had failed a high school math class 12 years prior, so I wasn't excited about seeing more math problems in my adult years. But David made it so easy to understand, and I left that class with a sense of confidence that I could be a better operator, one who could be responsible and accountable for the forces he was placing on the winch lines. And I learned the difference between cable and wire rope. Once you realize that resistance is a percentage of the casualty's weight that needs to be moved, and that there are only a few types and levels of resistance, making calculations in the field can be very easy, and you'll be a safer, more effective operator. Now, that doesn't mean that I've always been the perfect operator and that I haven't been a culprit responsible for some rigging failures. I've broken rigging. Yes, indeed I have. But I didn't walk away without learning valuable lessons. The last wire rope failure I observed really opened my eyes to proper maintenance. The job involved recovering a casualty from a ditch. A single winch line was being used to roll the vehicle up a slight grade and back onto the roadway. I had calculated the resistance, and the wire rope was within its working load limit to apply the force. But what I didn't see was that while making its way out of the ditch, a part of the vehicle began to dig into the ground and increase the resistance. I noticed the telltale signs, the winch slowing down, the more prominent sound of the wires grating against one another on the winch drum. But I didn't stop like I should have. All of a sudden, the winch line broke as the winch line passed over the sheave at the end of the boom. While the failure came as a surprise, the most astonishing observation was the cloud of red dust that surrounded the end of the boom. The wire rope had been weakened by corrosion and rust that wasn't visible from an external inspection. A lack of lubrication had allowed water to penetrate the strands and individual wires and eat away at the metal. This wire rope failed from the inside out. Fortunately, no person was injured, nor was the client's vehicle damaged. But that didn't have to be the case. It could have been a catastrophic event where I didn't live to tell the tale. Keeping your winch line spooled neatly under tension, regularly inspecting it and lubricating it with an approved lubricant is vital to the life and strength of the wire rope. I hope you learned from my lesson that I received the hard way, and that my first WreckMaster instructor will forgive me for not living the discipline back in those days. I love you, David. Whether you think taking all of these things into consideration is as uptight as a starched and creased pair of dark blue jeans, or you're content with the rigging that is as worn out as my daughter's holy Levi's, I'd hope you'd at least consider your reputation, your life, and the lives of those around you the next time you engage the winch. The forces may be greater than you'd expect. The conditions may change, and the rigging might not be as strong as it once was. In the words of Lou Holtz, it's not the load that breaks you down. It's the way you carry it. For WreckMaster, I'm Casey Burrows. See ya in the ditch.